Hey, my hope is that song is our prayer for this morning, that God, you are here now. Spirit, come have your way. Hopefully that's your prayer for your life in general, that God, you are here right now in my life. Maybe you're here today for the very first time wondering what that even means. Well, you've come to the right place. My name is Brett. As I mentioned at the beginning of the service, I am the lead pastor here at New Life. And if you are new here for the first time wondering what is any of this about, I would love to have a conversation with you and share with you why we gather here on Sunday. And why we gather here is a lot like what that song said. God, we want you here. Spirit, breathe like the wind, come have your way. And so that's our prayer for our lives in general. And so we're in the book of Joshua. We're in a second week in this series that's going to be indefinite. I don't know when this series is going to end. And as I mentioned last week, it's something that's challenging me, that I like to be very clear and concise and succinct in my planning, and I know exactly what we're going to do, when we're going to do it. And this series is open-ended, going, God, be here. Spirit, have your way. So guess what? Today, you know how many verses we're adding to last week? 2. Woo, right? You guys are excited about that. So last week, we did Joshua 1 through 4. This week, we're doing Joshua 1 through 6. And we're going to go crazy with 2 more verses. You know, another thing I shared is I'm not wearing a blue shirt, at least not all the time, which, as you may know, I had for 16 months, actually 18 months, ever since I stepped on this stage, had worn a blue shirt and dark pants every Sunday. And so I am really putting myself out of my comfort zone with a white shirt, because I was told it makes you look pale. Is that true? Is that how that works? Especially on a day where it's snowing, you look extra white. I look really white today. So trying to be uncomfortable. But how about you? What is God challenging you in? Where are you at? How is he pushing you to use your gifts outside of your comfort zone? Maybe it's in your everyday life. Maybe it's at home. Maybe it's with friends. Or maybe it's where you work. If I were to ask you about your place of employment, what would you tell me? What would you say? Is God using you there? He has you there for a purpose. Are you loving it there? Is it exactly where you're supposed to be right now? In fact, if I asked you about your current place of employment, would you tell me it's the greatest job you've ever had? Like you absolutely love it. Or how about school? Or maybe whatever it is that you do every day throughout the week. Would you tell me that it is the greatest thing that you have ever done in your whole life? Well, guess what? Statistics in the United States tell me that the answer would probably be no. Most people dread getting up. Majority of people in the United States dread getting up and going to work every day, right? It's why they call it the Mondays. If there's no such thing as the Mondays, it would be because we all loved our jobs. In fact, I was in a place a couple days ago where it said, this is the Mondayest Monday that's ever Mondayed. I don't even know what that means. But it was funny, right? Because Monday is a thing, because many of us sit there going, oh. But what if I asked you about your favorite job ever? What would you say? Why did you love it? What was so great about it? Maybe you are in it right now. I can tell you that I am in it right now. I love what I get to do. And it oozes out of me probably way too much. In fact, last week, I also took a podium away. I'd been using a podium primarily, and I put that to the side. And somebody told me that I should probably bring it back because it contained a little bit of the energy I had last week. It was like there. I was like, yeah, woo, let's go, come on. And all of you went, ah. In fact, somebody told me at one point they thought I was literally going to jump off the stage. Like, that's what the next step was in my excitement, because I love what I get to do. Aside from this, though, I'd tell you that one of my favorite jobs was when I was in college. If you think about why you love what it is that you do, I'm sure many of you come up with different reasons, but I loved this job in college because I got to work with a bunch of people that I really enjoyed being around. I worked construction for 3 years when I was in college, and one of the guys I got to work with was my best friend. I then worked for 2 guys that were just a blast to be around, that were super hospitable. In fact, the 3rd year that I was a part of that job, I actually lived in my boss's basement with my best friend while I was getting ready to get married. It was the greatest summer ever. It was so much fun. And I got to do stuff with my hands. I got to build things. And I got to walk away from it going, man, I did something today. There was a sense of accomplishment. I was with people I loved, and I got to accomplish things that made me feel like I was making a difference. So what about your best job? Why did you love it? What if I flipped it? What if I asked you today, What's the worst job you've ever had? Maybe it's the one you're in right now. I don't know. But if you thought about the worst job you've ever had, what made it so bad? I can tell you the worst job I've ever had. Right out of college, I worked for a finance company. And my title was finance and account manager. And I got to call you. So say you finance something. If you bought a car or you bought some furniture or you bought like a low to mid-level loan or took a low to mid-level loan, my job was to call you after you got the financing to make sure that you knew what you were getting into, right? So do you understand the terms? Do you know when you have to pay it off? And I kind of monitored all of that for this company. But the real part of my job was then a couple weeks later, I'd call you back up and try to sell you a larger loan, right? That was the in, to get you in with this loan, and then I'd make warm calls because I've already connected with you. I wasn't cold calling. I'd already connected with you, kind of shared with you the terms of your loan. I'd have your credit report, and I'd kind of highlight something then within the credit report that was an anomaly, that maybe was a red flag. And I'd be like, you know what? Did you know this about your current financial situation? If you were to do this instead, it would make it much better. Like, I don't know, refinance your home. How does that sound? I hated it. Hated it. Yes, pretty much a telemarketer. Not quite. They were warm. You ventured into it. You were willing to allow me into your phone. And I sat there every day staring at the clock going, when is this going to be over? It was super competitive. I didn't feel like I was making a difference. I wasn't really known. It was even a race to answer the phone because it was so competitive. If a phone call came in, it could be a lead, somebody wanting a loan. We would race to grab the phone. And then we'd sit there. If we got it first, we'd make fun of everybody in the office. Because it was an open office and we're all staring at each other. It was miserable, absolutely miserable. Well, there's a book that actually gives us insight into why jobs are miserable. A gentleman by the name of Patrick Lencioni wrote a book called 3 Signs of a Miserable Job. Patrick Lencioni is a business author and sociologist who studied why jobs are miserable. And he came up with 3 things. First one he said was anonymity. In the job, you're not known. People don't know who you are. You are not personally invested in. The second thing he said after anonymity was irrelevance. That in your job, you felt like what you were doing didn't matter. And the third thing he said then was it was immeasurable. You can't measure whether you are doing well or not. So 3 signs of a miserable job: anonymity, irrelevance, immeasurable. Maybe before today, you came in here going, my job's not that bad. And now you see that sign or see those signs going, I have a miserable job. I apologize. I didn't mean to ruin your day. But as they studied jobs all over the United States, they said, this is what it means, or this is what it looks like to be in a miserable job, or maybe in a miserable situation where you're trying to add value. As we jump into Joshua this morning, in the first part of Joshua, it'd be very easy to look at Joshua's situation and go, you know what? What he's about to do is going to be absolutely miserable, right? Moses is dead. We read that last week. We'll read it here again in a second. Moses is dead. Joshua's about to step in, and the last thing anybody wants to do in a situation where you're following the guy is be the guy who follows the guy. In fact, it's known within business, if you're going to be the guy in a situation, be the guy after the guy, because the guy after the guy always gets fired. It's true. It's just the way that it is. And so Joshua's stepping into a huge situation where he's the guy right after the guy. And oh, by the way, this was a big guy. He was a big deal. We talked about that last week. He probably the greatest leader ever, maybe in the history of the world, but for sure the Israelites. And Joshua steps into this situation that had to be miserable. Nobody wants that position. Second, then, it's a group of individuals that are whining, that are complaining. At one point, they're like, we just want to go back to Egypt. We don't even want to be here anymore. Let's get a leader that'll take us where we want to go. Joshua gives a pep talk prior to being the leader. And what do they want to do to him? They want to stone him. They want to take him out and kill him. That's probably not a good start to being the leader of this group of people, right? It had to have been miserable. It had to have been daunting in the very least. And yet, as we look at this situation, we're going to see how Joshua handles this. And there's a lot of things that we can understand from how he dealt with it and the way that we deal with our lives today. So open with me to Joshua chapter 1, 1 through 6. Joshua chapter 1, 1 through 6. It's towards the beginning of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua. If you open up to Joshua chapter 1, 1 through 6, we're going to be kind of taking a look at what we saw last week and then adding 2 more verses to it. But I just wanted to let you know, if you don't have a Bible this morning, I'd love to give you one. There's a number of them back on the table, back in the back. If you don't want a hard copy, you can download one on any smart device, on any iPhone, any of the other devices. Go to the Bible app in your app store. That's what we use. And you can actually download these slides, take them with you. If you save them right now, you can make copies of them all week long. So open Joshua chapter 1, 1 through 6. We're going to begin in verse 1. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan into the land I'm about to give them, to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give to them. That's where we're going to stop today, but I want to take a little bit of a unique look into this, and I want to take Patrick Lencioni's lens of 3 signs of a miserable job. And I want to look at Joshua's situation here and ask the question, is Joshua's job going to be miserable? So the first lens was anonymity. Is Joshua anonymously or going to be anonymous in this position? Is he coming into this position as someone that's not going to be known? And very clearly the answer is no. In fact, in this new job, Joshua is very well known. In fact, Joshua's direct boss in this job is God himself. What's cool about this is we see in these first 6 verses that there's a very intimate relationship with Joshua and his boss already. He will not be anonymous. In fact, Joshua was handpicked himself. If you go back into Numbers chapter 27, 15 through 23, Moses can see what's coming. He understands that the end is near, and so he says this in verse 15 to the Lord. He says, May the Lord, the God who gives breath to all living things, appoint someone over this community to go out and come in before them, one who will lead them out and bring them in. So the Lord's people will not be like sheep without a shepherd. So the Lord said to Moses, Take Joshua, son of Nun, a man in whom is the spirit of leadership, and lay your hand on him. Have him stand before Eleazar the priest and the entire assembly and commission him in their presence. Give him some of your authority so the whole Israelite community will obey him. He is to stand before Eleazar the priest, who will obtain decisions for him by inquiring of the Urim before the Lord. At his command, he and the entire community of the Israelites will go out, and at his command they will come in. Moses did as the Lord commanded him. He took Joshua and had him stand before Eleazar the priest and the whole assembly. Then he laid his hands on him and commissioned him, as the Lord instructed through Moses. Joshua by no means was anonymous. In fact, he was handpicked by God to be in this situation, to be the guy after the guy. God knew him very clearly by name, and not just Joshua himself, but the Israelites in general. God knew exactly who they were. He was very familiar with the situation. He knew exactly what was going on. He was right in the middle of it, to the very point of the leader itself saying, This is who I have. As Moses petitioned God, God said, It will be Joshua who will lead me. You see that intimacy then go a step further right here in this very first 6 verses, which could easily be a passage that gets overlooked. In fact, as you read through this, many of you may know this passage, but some of you are going to sit here going, man, I've never even really paid attention to this. What's cool about this passage is that God is literally talking to Joshua. He's having a conversation with him. He's talking to him as clearly as you and I are having a conversation today, which doesn't seem that spectacular because the stories that we tell all the time in church are the big, crazy, drawn out, incredible stories, right? How did God talk to Moses? Where was the first experience that God talked to Moses? Anybody tell me? A burning bush. Exactly. We share that story over and over and over again. So this story would be way cooler if there was a burning bush, huh? Why didn't God talk to Joshua in a burning bush? I don't know. Or maybe on a mountain. God talked to Moses on a mountain and there was rumbling and there was shaking and there was clouds and it was a big deal. yeah, there's no mountain in this picture. Maybe some fire a little bit, maybe a little bit of smoke, maybe something. Come on. Well, how was God talking to Joshua? We don't know. Was it in a dream? Was it like this? Did he come down? Did he see him face to face? Was it a big booming voice from the cloud? We don't know. What we do know is this moment is one that we should not overlook. This is a big deal. God is talking to Joshua. There is this relationship. God has taken him and said, you will be the one that will lead this people. And we see that to the next step where he says, as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. God makes a very personal promise to Joshua in this situation, saying, as you go, I will be with you wherever you will go. I will never leave you nor forsake you. So his position definitely would not be anonymous. Was his position then irrelevant? As he took this new job, would it be irrelevant? Verse 3, I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. That statement, that declaration by God, told Joshua that this job was going to be extremely relevant. This job was relevant because what was about to happen was that God's promise was going to come true for his people. In fact, this was God's ultimate promise. Way back when he first chose the Israelites to be his people with Abraham, he made him a promise in that moment. It's called a covenant. He made a covenant with Abraham, and he said that I will give you this land, and this land's going to be spectacular. That at some point your people will take over this land. Not right now. There's going to be a period of time before this happens, and there's a number of reasons why there will be a period of time, and we'll talk about that here in the future as we go through Joshua. But at some point you will come into this land. And so they've been trying to find this land. They've been trying to get there. They've been working through the desert. They were on the edge of it, and then they weren't on the edge of it. And now they're about in the place where Joshua is going to be the leader who's going to take them to inherit this. And this is what God had said in Genesis 12 to Abram before he was renamed Abraham. He says, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran. And they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring, I will give this land. This was an epic promise. That God had said very clearly that my people will reside right here. And he had shown Abram, who would become Abraham, the promise that he would give him. He then renewed his covenant with his people continually. He says this to Moses in Exodus 19, 1 through 8, in what's known as the Mosaic covenant. On the first day of the third month after the Israelites left Egypt, on that very day they came to the desert of Sinai. After they set out from Rephidim, they entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there. And Moses went up to God, and the Lord called him from the mountain and said, this is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites. So Moses went back and summoned the elders and the people and said before them all the words the Lord commanded him. And the people responded, we will do everything the Lord has said. So Moses brought their answer back to the Lord. This was a big deal. God had made a promise. Moses had been reissued that promise. The Israelites ventured into that promise and said, we will be a part of that promise. And guess what? Joshua now has the opportunity to lead them into this promise. By no means was his job going to be irrelevant. How about immeasurable? Again, the answer is very clearly no. This job was very measurable. Your territory, verse 4, will extend from the desert to Lebanon, the great river, the Euphrates, Hittite country to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. They very clearly knew where they were going, what they were doing. So as we see in this first passage, Joshua and the Israelites are known. What they're about to embark on is very relevant, and it's clearly measurable. As God has said, this is the land that I am going to give you. So what if you were in a job like that? What if God came to you and said, I have a task for you. I have a job for you. I personally know you, and you have a responsibility to go do something for me. And it's quite measurable. What would you say? How would you respond? I can only imagine Joshua was pumped. Woo! Right? There had to be this excitement. There had to be this energy. He was the young man that before had seen the promised land. He'd gone and he scouted it out. And as I told you last week, he's sitting there at one point arguing with his people going, do you not understand that we are about to do this? Well, God wasn't ready for them to do that yet, so they had to back off a little bit, and they go through a number of different things. And now Joshua's the guy who's sitting on the edge of the promised land, ready to jump. I can only imagine he had to have been like, let's go. As we go into the rest of Joshua, it has to be something that we know is going to be fulfilling. Will this task be fulfilling? Will Joshua experience a job where the satisfaction level was very high? And I think the answer to that is yes. Before we go any further, I want to explain why. And there's 3 reasons I think this job for Joshua will be very fulfilling. First one is people. This was a very special people to God. As I mentioned, they were not anonymous. God knew who these people were. God knew the Israelites. In fact, God had chosen the Israelites from the very beginning. Through Abram, who became Abraham, in the Abrahamic covenant, he had said, I have something for you. Your people will be blessed. They will be special. Why? And I read an author this week who said it this way, which I thought was fantastic. He said, God wanted a flagship nation that was an example to the world, not of how they behave, but of how he behaves. See, God needed a people. He needed a group of individuals that would show the world exactly who he was. Why? Because God is a personal God. He's a God that knows us. He's a God that is involved in everything that we are doing. As we can see with his relationship with Joshua and the Israelites, he was there with them very intimately saying that I am here in the midst of you. And that's exactly who God is. God is a personal God. And now Joshua was leading the people of God into the land that God had promised. It was going to be incredible, extremely fulfilling. But why did God choose the Israelites? Why couldn't it have been somebody else? In fact, for years, people have asked this question. What was it about the Israelites? I think the Bible gives us a couple hints. It points in that direction. I think one of the things the Bible shows us is the Israelites were the underdogs. They were the ones that nobody wanted, that nobody cared for. They were the ones that nobody thought could ever do anything great. How many people here love cheering for the underdogs? Whoo, yes. Is that not the greatest story of all time? When we watch college football on Sundays, my kids are always asking, who do we cheer for? And there's 2 ways that we determine who we cheer for. First one is who has the larger number by them, right? If they're 2 ranked teams, 1 being a small number, 25 being a large number, we cheer for the team that has the largest number by them because we want to see the underdog come through. Yesterday was a great weekend for the underdog. It was awesome. Second way we choose teams is which one's closest to our house. So we Google it, we find out which team's closest. See, we cheer for the underdogs because we want to see the underdog be victorious. My favorite time of year is March Madness. Why? Because I want to see the small school win. I want to see David take out Goliath. I want to see this group of individuals that nobody's given any credibility to that says, nope, they can't do it. I want to see them win, which is why I cheer for the Bears every year. And why you guys cheer for the Vikings. It doesn't make sense. And yet it does. We want the underdog to win. We want the team that has never done anything to do something great. And I think that's one of the main reasons why God chose the Jews. The Bible tells us they were the least of all people, that they really had no hope, that they were the underdog. And God said, out of you, I'm going to do this. Why? Because God takes the foolish things of this world to shame the wise. He takes the things that we could never understand to say, I will do something great through this. And he does it for the sheer purpose of his glory, because of his grace. Why did God choose the Israelites? I don't know if we'll ever know. But as we sit here today, it makes sense. As we think about God choosing any other people, it doesn't even really make sense. What if he chose the French? Who would want that? And if you're of that descent, I apologize. I mean, Canadians, is that any better? Eh? And we can joke and laugh about it. I'm just saying this purely in jest, because what if we placed somebody else in that category? What if he chose the Americans? What if he chose the Chinese? What if he chose insert people group? We'd still be asking the same question. God, why did you choose those people? I think when we boil it all down, it's very clear that God had to choose a people so God would be known through his people, which is why I love that statement, that he had a flagship nation, not because of who they were, but because of who he was. So we could see who God was, a personal, loving, living, caring God. Second thing then, why this would be fulfilling, was a promise. Like I said, this was a big promise. God had made this promise. He was now fulfilling this promise, and he made this promise specifically for this land. We could ask that question as well. Why specifically this land? Why where he chose? What was it all about? And there's all sorts of different reasons why. Again, we could speculate all we want. But I believe it's this, because God was a personal God. His people needed a place to live because he would live there. In Deuteronomy, it tells us that when he shared a vision for the land, he said, when you get in this land, then you will set up a place where I will reside. That God himself would live here on earth in the midst of his people so that the whole world would see him for who he was and experience his glory. That's pretty incredible. That the creator of the universe would choose a people that he could be with so the whole world could see him. I think there are other reasons why he chose the promised land. If you think about where it's strategically positioned, if you think about oil, if you think about a number of things that matter to us today, I don't think God made a mistake when he chose that piece of land, because even to this very day, all eyes are on Israel. The whole world watches what goes on right there in that central piece of property that still exists to this day. God had a plan. He knew what he was doing for his people so that he would be known. Third reason then, so first people, second promise. Third then I believe is purpose. There was a purpose for what God was about to do. There was a very clear purpose for Joshua's position, for his people, for this land. What was that purpose? Well, Joshua's name hints at it. We talked about it last week, that Joshua was renamed from Hoshea to Joshua because Joshua means the Lord is salvation. See, God knew his people. He knew the land that they would dwell in. And he knew that this land would very specifically fulfill the Abrahamic covenant, which says this: I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Joshua's name hinted at it, as the Lord is salvation, because out of this people, out of this land, would come the thing that would bless the whole world. And that's this man named Jesus, the Messiah. The Messiah would rise up, and Joshua had no idea what that looked like or what that meant, and he knew that what he was about to do was big. He knew that where he was about to go was this huge endeavor, that God was going to be with him, that he was going to be in the middle of this land that had been promised for this very specific purpose, and yet he couldn't see yet what that was going to be. We have the benefit today to look back knowing exactly what it was, that there was this purpose for this land, so this man named Jesus would come out and the world could be saved through him. Praise the Lord. Woo! That the Messiah would rise up out of this promised land and be the Savior of all people and fulfill the Abrahamic covenant. that all peoples on earth would be blessed through him. You see, through his people, the Jews, and his land, the promised land, would come the ultimate purpose for all of life. And that's this man named Jesus. Which is great to look back going, man, that's fantastic. That's really great stuff. What do I do with that? Well, I think those three reasons that we're going to make Joshua's job fulfilling, people, promise, purpose, are the exact same things today as we sit here that make our lives fulfilling, directly connected to the exact same thing that Joshua was experiencing in his day. And why do I say that? First one, people. Our lives are fulfilling because of the people that we are a part of and the people that we are around. Why do I say that? Because as I mentioned, we have the ability to look backwards and see what has happened as we come forward and what happened after Joshua and the Israelites went into the land. We're going to get to a lot of that as we continue to go on, but one of the things that happened is they screwed up. Things went bad real fast, and then we get into this awful book called Judges, and then we get these kings, and then we get all this other stuff that if you continue to read, you sit there going, holy cow, what were they doing? You know what they were doing? The exact same stuff that we do every day. And yet God, in the middle of all of that, still had a plan, and so there's all these covenants. There were a couple more covenants that came after it. One was called the Davidic covenant. The Davidic covenant was this covenant that God made with David as they've come through all of this stuff. As they get into the kings, God then says through David that your line will continue and I will bring a king that will rule the whole world. And because of you and because of your line and out of your lineage will come this man that will save all people. And so we continue to follow that story, the Davidic covenant. The Davidic covenant comes to fruition and completion in what we call the new covenant. And the new covenant is what we celebrated today because that king that was promised through David is this man named Jesus. And Jesus made a covenant with each one of us saying that in my blood, through my blood, that no longer is it just this group of individuals that were chosen, it's all people, that I have died for all humanity. And if you believe in me as your personal Lord and Savior, guess what? You are now chosen. And that salvation comes through faith. It doesn't come through actions. It doesn't come anything that you can do. It comes through the fact that I have died and rose again. And through me is the way to eternity. And so I think our lives are fulfilling today, and I say the same thing as Joshua. Joshua was known, Joshua was chosen, Joshua was part of God's chosen people, the Israelites, and guess what? Because of the new covenant, so are you. That our lives are fulfilling because we, through Jesus and his covenant with us, are God's chosen people. That our lives are not anonymous. We are known. We are loved. We are chosen because of what it was that Jesus did. The new covenant in his blood that we celebrate, which hopefully then, as we have taken communion, we think about communion completely differently because our lives are fulfilling because we are God's chosen people. That we are part of the new covenant. But it goes even further than that. Not only are we part of the new covenant, but we have the exact same promise that God gave to Moses, that God gave to Joshua when he said, as I was with Joshua, I will be with you too. He says that specifically to Joshua. He says that specifically to us. How does he do that? Because God himself in the form of Jesus came to this earth, and as he was saying goodbye to his disciples, which would be us, God's chosen people, if you believe in Jesus Christ, your personal Lord and Savior, guess what he said to you very specifically, non-anonymous person that he's in the middle of your life. You know what he said? He said this, Matthew 28:20. Surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age. God himself spoke to his disciples through his new covenant saying, surely I am with you, my chosen people, always to the very end of the age. The same God that spoke to Joshua is the same God that speaks to us today and says, I know you. I know exactly who you are, and I make my covenant through my blood with you that wherever you go, I will be with you always. We are God's chosen people. That makes our life fulfilling. Second, promise. Do we still have the same promise of the land that Israel had with God? And I would say yes, but it's been expanded. Is the land in Israel right now that we know of, is that still very important? The answer to that is yes. And we will talk about that later in our series as we get into this a little bit deeper. But I want to take that promise that God made that I will give you the land, and I want to blow it up a little bit. I want to make that a little bit larger for our sake, because what God said is, I will give you this land specifically to Joshua. And what God said again to us is that I will give you a land. And when you go into that land, I will be with you always. And what was that land? 28:19, therefore go and make disciples where? Of all nations. See, God's focus was no longer just specifically on this piece of land, but when Jesus came, when he died, when he rose again, he said, I now have a task for you. The promise that I gave to my people for this land, I am now expanding it, so when you go, guess where you need to go? You need to go to all nations. Because not only do I have my eyes on this land, I have my eyes on the whole world. And you now are a part of that. Now, we have the promise today that God has given us this land. And so last week, I got a little passionate about the whole idea of the land. And many of you are probably sitting there going, I don't even know what he's talking about. But God has given us the land. And we're in some ways like Joshua sitting there going, come on. But in other ways, we're sitting there going, no, we're like the 10 who said, no, God, I don't think we can do it. I said last week, I don't want to be one of the 10. I want to be one of the 2 saying, God, we can go. Because guess what? You know where we're all sitting right now? In the nations. That's exactly where we are at. When we talk about Pastor Tanatat and where he's at, you know where he is? In the nations. We have tasted it. We have seen it. God has put us there. And so in some ways, I think we're standing like the Israelites on the edge of the promised land. And many of us are going, no, I don't want to go in. I'm too nervous. I'm too scared. I don't want to do this. And I'm sitting like Joshua going, come on. We're like right here. Can't you see it? Like there's this, it's so good. And at the same time, we get into Joshua chapter 24, and we're going to see a nation that's in the land that sits there going, I'm good. And I'm going to make the direct correlation in Joshua chapter 24 that we are in the land, and we're sitting there going, nah, God, I'm good. We walk this tension today in our world today that we're on the edge of the land, that the harvest is plentiful. The promised land is waiting for us. It's time to enter, and yet we're in the land going, God, I've tasted it and I've come comfortable. And yet we have the same promise that they did at that time, that the land is there. Why? Because the land is where God lives. See, God is no longer confined to just this one small piece of land in this one tent where one person speaks to him. God has blown it up and said, I am now everywhere that you go. When you go to all the nations, I will be with you. And you can bank on that. That is my promise. Woo! People, promise. Last one, purpose. What's our purpose? Go into every nation, teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. See, Joshua was looking forward, and his name was pointing to the fact that the Lord is salvation. We're looking backwards, standing here going, you know what? The Lord is salvation. That we have a purpose, and that purpose is the fact that the Lord is salvation. We have a big job to do. And so as you sit here today, and I asked the question at the beginning, do you enjoy your job? I need you to blow up the idea of what your job is, because maybe your 9 to 5, you've realized today, is quite miserable. But the actual job that you have given or been given today is very exciting. And it's extremely fulfilling. Because we serve a God that knows us. And today we can know these things, that you are known, that you are relevant in God's plan, and that you are making a difference as Christ lives in you and is seen through you. So wherever you go tomorrow, whatever it is that you are doing, know that your life is fulfilling because you are not anonymous. What you are doing is not irrelevant. And it is very measurable. Because someday we're going to stand in heaven together. And we're going to be wooing. Woo! And we're going to be celebrating, and we're going to be jumping up and down, and we're going to be screaming and praising and singing hallelujah and staring at weird beasts that have eyes all over their bodies and wings and crazy things going, what is that? And we're going to have every person that we ever had an impact on standing right next to us doing the same thing. Because our purpose is not where God has put us Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. Our purpose is that God has put us there Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, because the Lord is salvation. And when we understand that, when we go to where God has us, know that what we are doing is extremely fulfilling. Because God knows exactly what he is doing in his time for his purpose. And so here's my challenge this morning. That we take that last part, verse 5 and 6, as a personal challenge to each one of us. Because God has reiterated this promise all the way through his word. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, as I was with Joshua, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because as we read Scripture, it's all the way through. As God said that to Joshua, he says that to us. No one will stand against you. Not even the gates of hell will stand against you. Go to the ends of the earth. Why? Because I will be there with you. As I was with Moses, as I was with Joshua, I will be there with you to the very end of the age. So what must we do? We must be strong and courageous. Woo! So what does that mean? Come back next week and find out. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you. We thank you for who you are. We thank you that you are a God that knows us, that loves us, that is personal, that shows us